Now, as the modern era moved to its later stages, Romanticism would re-engage the modern mind from another field altogether. The decline of Hegel and of metaphysical and historical overviews had originated in an intellectual environment in which physical science was the dominant force in determining the cultural understanding of reality. But as science itself began to be revealed, both epistemologically and pragmatically, as a relative infallible form of knowledge, and with both philosophy and religion having already lost their previous cultural preeminence, many reflective individuals began to turn inward to an examination of consciousness itself as a potential source of meaning and identity in a world otherwise devoid of stable values. This new focus on the inner workings of the psyche reflected as well as an increasingly sophisticated concern with those unconscious structures within the mind of the subject that were determining the ostensible nature of the object. Continuation of the Kantian project on a more comprehensive level. Thus it was that of all the instances of a romantically influenced science, the most enduring and seminal proved to be the depth psychology of Freud and Jung, both deeply influenced by the stream of German Romanticism that flowed from Goethe through Nietzsche. In its concern with the elemental passions and powers of the unconscious, with imagination, emotion, memory, myth, and dreams, with introspection, psychopathology, hidden motivations, and ambivalence, psychoanalysis brought Romanticism's preoccupations to a new level of systematic analysis and cultural significance. With Freud, who first turned to medical science after hearing Goethe's Ode to Nature as a student, and who throughout his life obsessively collected archaic religious and mythological statuary, the Romantic influence was often hidden or inverted by the Enlightenment rationalist assumptions that pervaded his scientific vision. But with Jung, the Romantic inheritance became more explicit as Freud's discoveries and concepts were expanded and deepened. In the course of analyzing a vast range of psychological and cultural phenomena, Jung found evidence of a collective unconscious common to all human beings and structured according to powerful archetypal principles. Though it was clear that human experience was locally conditioned by a multitude of concrete biographical, cultural, and historical factors, subsuming all these at a deeper level appeared to be certain universal patterns or modes of experience. Archetypal forms that constantly arranged the elements of human experience into typical configurations and gave to collective human psychology a dynamic continuity. These archetypes endured as basic symbolic forms. These archetypes endured as basic a priori symbolic forms, while taking on the custom of the moment in each individual life and each cultural era, permeating each experience, each cognition, and each world view. The discovery of the collective unconscious and its archetypes radically extended psychology's range of interest and insight. Religious experience, artistic creativity, esoteric systems, and the mythological imagination were now analyzed in non-reductive terms strongly reminiscent of the Neoplatonic Renaissance and Romanticism. A new dimension to Hegel's understanding of historical dialectic emerged with Jung's insight into the collective psyche's tendency to constellate archetypal oppositions in history before moving toward a synthesis of a higher level. A host of factors previously ignored by science and psychology were now recognized as significant to the psychotherapeutic enterprise and given vivid conceptual formulation. The creativity and continuity of the collective unconscious, the psychological reality and potency of spontaneously produced symbolic forms and autonomous mythic figures, the nature and power of the shadow, the psychological centrality of the search for meaning, the importance of teleological and self-regulating elements in the psyche's processes, the phenomenon of synchronicities. Freud and Jung's depth psychology thus offered a fruitful middle ground between science and the humanities, sensitive to the many dimensions of human experience, concerned with art and religion and interior realities, with qualitative conditions and subjectively significant phenomena, yet striving for empirical rigor, for rational cogency, for practical, therapeutically effective knowledge in a context of collective scientific research. But precisely because depth psychology was originally grounded in the broader scientific worldview, its larger philosophical impact was initially limited. This limitation existed not so much because depth psychology was vulnerable to criticism for being insufficiently scientific, let's say compared with, for example, behaviorist psychology or statistical mechanics. Such criticisms were occasionally voiced by more conservative scientists, but did not significantly affect depth psychology's cultural acceptance, since most who familiarized themselves with its insights found these to possess a certain internal self-evidence and persuasive logic, often bearing the characteristic of an illumination. But more constraining for depth psychology's impact was the very nature of its study. Given the basic subject-object dichotomy of the modern mind, the insights of depth psychology had to be declared relevant only to the psyche, to the subjective aspect of things, not to the world as such. Even if objectively true, they were objectively true only in relation to a subjective reality. They did not and could not change the cosmic context within which the human being sought psychological integrity. This limitation was further enforced by the modern epistemological critique of all human knowledge. Jung, though metaphysically more inclined than Freud, was epistemologically more exacting, and repeatedly affirmed throughout much of his life the fundamental epistemological limits of his own theories, though he also reminded more conventional scientists that their epistemological situation was no different. With his philosophical grounding in the Kantian critical tradition, rather than in Freud's more conventional rationalist materialism, Jung was compelled to admit that his psychology could have no necessary metaphysical implications. It is true that Jung's granting the status of empirical phenomena to psychological reality was itself a major step past Kant, for he thereby gave substance to internal experience as Kant had to external experience. All human experience, not just sense impressions, had to be included for a genuinely comprehensive empiricism. Yet in a Kantian spirit, Jung stated that whatever the data provided by psychotherapeutic investigations, these could never provide substantial warrant for propositions concerning the universe or reality as such. The discoveries of psychology could reveal nothing with certainty but the world's actual constitution, no matter how subjectively convincing was the evidence for a mythic dimension, a world soul, or a supreme deity. Whatever the human mind produced could be regarded only as a product of the human mind and its intrinsic structures, with no necessary objective or universal correlations. The epistemological value of depth psychology lay rather in its capacity to reveal those unconscious structural factors, the archetypes, which appeared to govern all mental functioning and hence all human perspectives on the world. Thus, the nature of Jung's field and concepts seemed to require an exclusively psychological interpretation of his findings. They were indeed empirical, but they were only psychologically empirical. Depth psychology had perhaps rendered a deeper inner world for modern man, but the objective universe as known by natural science was necessarily still opaque, without transcendent dimensions. It is true that many striking parallels existed between Jungian archetypes and Platonic archetypes. But for the ancient mind, Platonic archetypes were cosmic, while for the modern mind, Jungian archetypes were only psychic. Therein lay the fundamental difference between the classical Greek and the modern Romantic. Descartes, Newton, Locke, and Kant had to intervene. With the bifurcation of the modern mind between Romantic and depth psychology interiority on the one hand, and the naturalistic cosmology of the physical sciences on the other, there seemed to be no possibility for a genuine synthesis of subject and object, psyche and world. Yet the therapeutic and intellectual contributions of Freudian Jungian tradition to 20th century culture were many, and gained more significance with each passing decade. Indeed, the modern psyche appeared to require the services of depth psychology with increasing urgency, as a profound sense of spiritual alienation and other symptoms of social and psychological distress became more widespread. With the traditional religious perspectives no longer offering effective solace, depth psychology itself, along with its numerous offspring, took on characteristics of a religion, a new faith for modern man, a path for the healing of the soul, bringing regeneration and rebirth, epiphanies of sudden insight, and spiritual conversion.